Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. Very good evening to both of you. With us from now until just before midnight. So to the front pages then, let us start with the Eye, which leads on today's pre-Christmas traffic chaos, which it says hit the rails, the road, the air and the sea. Assisted dying campaigner Esther Ranson is top story for the Daily Express, appealing to MPs to stop being cruel and allow a free vote on the issue in Parliament. Dame Esther has terminal lung cancer. On the same subject, the Daily Mail asks, is the tide turning on assisted dying? The Sun has an exclusive with Alex Batty, the missing teenager who turned up after being missing for 6 years. The Guardian leads with a new study showing that 800,000 people were admitted to hospitals in England and Wales last year with malnutrition, a threefold increase on 10 years ago. The Daily Telegraph reveals that the late Queen's family persuaded her to spend her last days at Balmoral as they made preparations for her death. The Financial Times has been speaking to the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, who says he'd like to see the Bank of England cut interest rates in 2024 to lift the economic mood in what is expected, of course, to be an election year. Well, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to them and speak to Steve and to Salma. Welcome to both of you. And certainly a number of newspapers have led on this incident in Prague, this devastating incident, not least because of the dramatic photograph they've decided to put on their front pages, Salma.
Yes, and as you can see, actually, they're quite horrifying photos. These people who are cowering on a balcony to obviously get away from this gunman. And we've seen, actually, there's an update to the number that I've seen, is that 15 people have died. And there is a quote from the chief of police in Prague who's saying that there are going to potentially be more deaths. There has been some other reporting from his quotes on the front pages of other newspapers, Guardian in particular, where he's said that the gunman has been inspired, for want of a better word, by other mass shootings witnessed abroad. So there is a lot, I think, that's going to be unpacked about this story. But really now, for the moment, if you look at those photographs, I mean, having to go through this, an incredibly traumatic experience for everybody involved.
Yes, although I think the Czech president was trying to sort of calm speculation on issues like an inspiration of a Russian mass shooting recently being the motive for this, because so much is still to come out. But we do now know that this was a student of this alleged perpetrator who's beginning to be named locally, who legally owned guns, although whether he owned the guns in question, because he was heavily armed apparently, we still don't know.
Yeah, which I find really interesting. I didn't know that they are freely available in Prague, in the Czech Republic. Sam's lived there and told me this before while we were looking at the front pages. And this is really disturbing because if you look at the US, where, of course, it's famously easy to get hold of a gun, and you look at this, there are consequences, and this is a consequence. And the images are unbearable. The images that you've just shown of students hovering, on the edge of a kind of a precipice, just escaping, where clearly the gunman had been, a fellow student had been shooting, is just a photo of unbearable fear. This is what happens when guns are freely available, in some freakish cases, but enough to alarm everyone, I think.
Yes, and once again, quoting the president speaking earlier, they will look again at gun laws. I mean, it sounds a familiar story.
Familiar story.
We have the attacks on education establishments in America, and the news tonight of people barricading themselves into faculty rooms. The suggestion is they evacuated one faculty thinking he was going for a lecture there after the body of his father was found, not far from the west of Prague, but then he attacked another faculty. It's just absolutely terrible. And a day of mourning, we're told, on the 23rd of December now, for the nation, who will want to grieve at such a precious time of year for so many people.
Yeah, indeed. I think just going back to Steve's point around gun control, I think it's very interesting that in Europe, where actually we've got, generally speaking, quite strong gun control, why Czechia has been separate in that instance. And you know, there is a lot of history there in terms of the Velvet Revolution, people's fears and their need to want to defend themselves. And one of the hard things, I think, that also exists in America is that that sense that actually incidents like this make you want to own a gun even more, and whether that's going to see a spike in people wanting to own their own weapons, because fundamentally the fear then remains that actually the police and the state can't protect you as well as you might be able to yourself. So I think this is a debate that's going to get trickier for the president, not easier as a consequence of this.
But that is a totally irrational fear, because if guns aren't available, you don't have to have guns to defend yourself, because these maniacs won't have access to guns. So it's a debate that needs to be had and won. I think in the United States, it's the impossible debate, isn't it? But until it's won, you are in that catch-22 that people want them to defend themselves in case someone attacks you with a gun. If you can't get hold of the guns, they won't attack you.
Yeah, I mean, this is all irrational. This is the point
sure,
of it. It is all driven by that irrational fear. But I think as well, wider than just this incident, if we're starting to think about what happens in Europe, you know, is there going to be any contagion or to other European countries, and what's going to happen if indeed it has been some kind of mimicked attack, and whether that could create any issues in neighbouring countries.
Yes, I mean, certainly the suggestion is this has not been inspired by any international terrorism, but it also reminds us what a big impact the Dunblane massacre in this country had on our gun controls here.
Yeah.
Let's move on, shall we? It's Christmas time, obviously. Travel chaos, storms, wildcat strikes. You know, it's always something, isn't it, this time of year? Normally freezing fog, Steve, but there we are.
Yeah, I know. It's a guaranteed story on what date is today? 22nd or 21st, whatever it is.
21st.
I've lost all sense of time. Lost all sense of time in the build-up to Christmas. But one regular... Yeah, is it? Sure. Whatever. One kind of regular amidst the kind of festive sense of disorder is this story, isn't it? The nightmare of travel. And what I do think, of course you can't control storms, but each year, even when you don't have these storms, there is this sort of talk of travel chaos and train cancellations and all the rest of it. And it doesn't happen as much in Europe. Again, Sam was telling me about when she was living in Prague, that, you know, you could get trains all through this period with a kind of regularity that meant you could work on the assumption if you wanted to go somewhere for Christmas, you would get there. Here you can't at the best of times. Say storms you can't control. But, I mean, there are, I think, huge issues about how we run transport in this country, which is surprisingly low on the political agenda, given how virtually everyone we know, one way or another, will be touched by this at some point over the coming days. You know, even though us lot staying at home because of a desire to avoid such chaos.
Yes, well, spare a thought for those on a Norwegian cruise ship, MS Maud, which suffered a power outage during this storm in the North Sea.
Where are they?
Well, they apparently are starting to be towed towards a Danish port. Apparently, according to the Danish Joint Rescue Coordination Centre. It was a rogue wave, apparently, knocked out their ability to navigate themselves, which is not a comfortable experience. They were sailing roughly 200 kilometres off Denmark's west coast, roughly 330 kilometres off Britain's east coast, when strong winds blasted windows on the bridge of the vessel, allowing water to enter, which resulted in a power failure on the bridge. As I said, not comfortable. And earlier this evening, they began that tow to a Danish port. 266 passengers on board and 131 crew members. We send you our best, I think, at this point, don't we, really? Yeah. Let's move on, shall we, Salma, to the FT and this idea of a Super League, European Super League, back after it was ruled that it should not have been blocked in the first place.
I'm going to slightly cop out on this one because I know that Steve feels very passionately about this story, because my question to Steve earlier was, what's the big deal? And he gave me a real sort of telling off about the fairness in football.
I'll just do a 20-second summary. I'm a Spurs season ticket holder, and I can remember when this came up, because Spurs, although at the time they're flourishing now, albeit erratically, were languishing. They were part of this planned Super League. And frankly, it was just unsustainable. Manchester United were part of it, and Boris Johnson had to distance himself when he pretended that he didn't have a conversation about it to Manchester United. And the problem is, it removes the essence of the excitement that these teams would be in it each season. You wouldn't get sort of relegated.
There is an element of relegation, or you're allowed to be promoted from the lower leagues into the third tier of it, aren't you? I think
Well,
it's not as locked in as it was before.
Yeah,
Plan A has changed.
It's revised itself, but I've got a feeling this will not run because there was such a backlash last time, and there is such an obsession, irrational really, but such an obsession with the Premier League here, for example, that I don't think the club chairman of Spurs was really keen about this and had to really apologise for being keen. So I don't think it's going to happen.
An EU court has found that trying to impose a ban on clubs from being able to join this was unlawful. Therefore, there is no actual barrier. So clubs are now going to have to impose a restriction.
Of public opinion. And
exactly.
I think it's public opinion.
If it's going to happen as public opinion, I mean, this could potentially come back.
Yeah, well,
Interesting, yeah.
Oh, he's worried now. But without the Premier League, they're going nowhere, aren't they? It's been driven, it seems, by two of the big Spanish clubs. I'm going to move on to safer ground for you, possibly, which is Jeremy Hunt and how he sees the economy going into next year, and whether we're beginning to see the shape of whatever Tories' bid for their election campaign might be, Salma.
Yes, so this is a front-page story that has been prompted by an interview that the FT has done with the Chancellor, and he is talking about throwing off the declinism and the pessimism about the economy, which, as you would expect, the Chancellor would do at this point in an election year. But he is talking about the potential of the Bank of England to cut rates. Now, we're not at this point yet, as people from the Bank of England have pointed out, indeed, in this article. But it is interesting, and Steve and I were talking about this earlier, how the Chancellor is now going to frame this idea of a narrow path to victory, and potentially a little uplift in the way people are feeling about the economy might be enough for the Conservatives to say, don't let Starmer and his rabid lot ruin it. I'm sure he'll put it much more tactfully than that, but, that's the...
I doubt if it will be more tactful. I think it will be probably cruder. They ache for something like 1992, when, against expectations, they won on the message, we've stabilised the economy, don't let Labour ruin it. And that is the only hope for them amidst the internal chaos of the Tory party about boats from Rwanda. We're going to come on to another issue which has split them recently. And that is their only coherent message that gives them a kind of any hope at all. They're 20 points behind in the polls, but you can see that's going to be the framing. And he's ending the year, Jeremy Hunt, preparing the ground for January, where I think this will be the message. Now, my sense is it's too late. The mood has changed, and there's nothing they can do about it. But if there is anything, this is it. And this is a preview of much more to come, I think.
OK, we'll spot the window as it emerges. Both of you stay there. Lots more still to come in the next part of our programme, including this from the front page of The Guardian as the Home Office U-turns on the minimum salary for family visas. That issue you talked about, Steve. Back in a moment. Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. Welcome back to both of you. Steve, should we go to the Daily Mail now? Assisted dying is the tide turning. This is after the intervention of Esther Rantzen, herself obviously suffering from cancer, and whether or not, the mood is now changing in the nation about what to do about the choice to die.
Yeah, and in a surprisingly competitive field, I think this is the most interesting front page, because certainly it implies a certain sympathy from the Mail, which is a powerful force still in the British media, whether you like it or not. It's a powerful force for considering assisted dying. And it's fascinating on many levels. First of all, Esther Rantzen, who is seriously ill with lung cancer, what a power to set the news agenda. It's not the first time she's done it. She is astonishing, and I respect her hugely for doing this. It's also interesting that above that big headline, assisted dying, is the tide turning. Above that, after Esperanza calls for a national debate, some in church soften opposition, and Starmer says there's case for reform. So Starmer, in this context, treated respectfully on the Daily Mail front page. Doesn't happen very often. So I think all in all, it's really interesting. She set the agenda, and a powerful force in the media appears to be sympathetic.
And Sir Keir has said that if it does come before MPs, it would have to be a free vote. You know, you can't whip something like this effectively. But, you know, there is a sense, isn't there, that people, well, those who can afford can travel, you know, to Zurich now, and, you know, and we can keep people alive for a very long time with modern medicine and techniques, can't we?
Yeah, we can. I think Steve's point is interesting around, you know, how the media are treating this and what the shifts are. From a technocratic perspective, it's the question of how this bill would come into force for there to be a free vote in any case. So obviously there are a lot of issues, personal issues associated with this question, but unless a government decides that it's going to bring forward a legislation to change the law in this country, there is no free vote to be had. And I think the interesting thing is that whilst Keir Starmer can support a free vote, if he is going to be the Prime Minister, the question really for him is whether he is going to bring forward legislation from his government in order to have that free vote to change it. And what is going to prompt that? You're right, it's going to be those moving questions in that testimony that Esther Rantzen herself has brought forward, which is about, you know, who really does get to choose how you live your life and when you die.
I'm going to stay with you, former Home Office advisor, which is this idea that the minimum salary required to sponsor somebody to come in, you know, your wife or your husband or whoever it might be, has been, it seems, brought down by the government from 38,700, which was more than 20,000, you know, pounds more than it had been after an outcry. So tell us what your thoughts are for this one, because it seems to be down to 29,000 now.
So The Guardian has described this as a U-turn on a minimum salary. So, as you've said, it was being raised by the government to 38,000, which has had a lot of criticism because it's prohibitively expensive for a lot of people who are coming here to work on those salaries anyway. What's interesting about this is that the story says that instead of imposing the requirement now to increase the minimum salary requirement to 38,700, it will first be raised to 29,000. Now, I can't remember, and it's not cited here as to where the rate currently is, but it is by no means... It
was about 19,000, but
yes.
yeah.
So it's still significant.
Yeah.
So still significant in terms of the rise, but not complete. So they're saying it's incremental. Is that a U-turn, or is that what, in New Labour parlance, you might call spin?
I know you want to come in as well. We've run out of time for now. We will return to this, no doubt. But for now, Steve and Salma, thank you.